Hey there. Welcome back to Buckeye Bigfoot. Go ahead and grab your snackage and get ready. I have 2 sets of stories for you tonight. Are you ready? Me too. Let's get going. Bigfoot stories. 2 stories from my youth. The camping trip. 1977, in the river bottoms of the Trinity River on the Hearst-Fort Worth-Arlington city limits. All 3 cities came together in an area populated with old farms, 1 old bar, and the sewage plant. Just a wilderness in unincorporated land, not scooped up by any cities yet. There was a large gravel pit out there, very deep, and lots of offshoots and other sand and gravel pits used for mining these materials. We had been fishing in these pits and ponds since I was a preteen. Nutria, coyotes, skunks, raccoons, all of the expected wildlife. We went out mostly on the weekend when the big gravel trucks weren't running. Long days of fishing, napping, target practice with our little .22 rifles. Typical boy stuff for boys who loved the outdoors. Well, when we grew older, in our early teen years, we began exploring deeper and deeper into the gravel pits and the sloughs they created during the mining process. We were so far back, about a mile or so, where we couldn't even hear cars or any city activity. One day we found a great spot where the fish always were biting, and the area had a nice flat place to pitch a tent, start a fire, and have a good weekend of camping. It was about a 12 by 14 area right on the water. The water there was always about a foot to a foot and a half down from the bank, and we knew the water depth there was between 8 and 14 feet deep. Bass and crappie, they were easy catching and good eating. Where we were is underwater now. Trinity Boulevard to the north, Randall Mill to the south, and Precinct-lined road to the west. The southern part of that giant pond is where we grew up. It was much different then than it is now. This was our first time camping there, and as it would turn out, our last time camping there. We went out right after school on Friday, backpacks, fishing gear, and took us about an hour to get there. Then we set up and started fishing. We caught a couple of fish, cleaned them, and they were on the fire in our small cast-iron skillet with beans cooking in the can. We ate and watched the woods get darker as the sun set. It was summer, so the days were long and the shady woods were cool with the breeze blowing across the water. We both went to bed fairly quickly, and we were snoozing hard when we were both awakened in our tents by what sounded like someone with large boots stomping into our camp. We shouted from the tent that this was our campsite and to please leave. The footsteps stopped immediately. Then about 10 seconds later, there was a huge splash in the water, like someone dropped a big car in the slough or something. There was nothing after that for a few minutes. Then the frogs began their songs again, singing the way big pond frogs do. We still believed someone was out there, so I yelled out, "Hey, hey you!" And then I listened. Only frogs for about 30 seconds. Then one of the frogs sounded like it was saying, "Hey, hey you," but in a strange, froggy voice. It was hard to explain. Just think, if frogs could talk. Anyway, that freaked us out. We zipped up our little pup tent and started going back to sleep. A few seconds later, we heard what sounded like something big and wet coming out of the water. Like when you put a blanket in the bathtub and pull it out. It's that suction sound with all the drippy bits. We both froze. Then we heard our packs being turned over. Heavy sniffing. Stuff out there being moved around. We yelled out again from inside our tent, "Hey, hey!" All that noise stopped. Then it came to the front of our tent. Then the zippers for the doors started to be unzipped. Something or someone was unzipping our tent. I grabbed the zippers from the inside and zipped them back down. A few seconds later, it started unzipping the doors again. I grabbed the zippers again and smacked the canvas door flap, and I hit something on the other side. We heard a grunt. Then after a while, we both ended up passing out. It was dead sleep until first light. We woke up quickly, and we left almost everything right there. The camp was a mess. We began the hike home. It was about a mile out of the woods and then another mile home. When I arrived home, my father asked me where all of my gear was. I told him we just left it. He got angry, and when he cooled down, I told him the story. So I told him where the camp was, and I said I wasn't going back out there. So he drove out and checked out the camp. When he got back, he said the tent and the sleeping bags were torn to shreds. Our cooking pans were crumpled up, and the ground looked like a plow had gone through there. But you couldn't get a tractor back there. He did say something about footprints, but then he wouldn't say anything after that. I never went back out there, day or night, ever again. The girlfriend. This story occurred when I was 16 years old. I had a younger girlfriend and we really liked one another. We went everywhere together. She was 13, I was 16. We were just kids. So one night I went to her house to get her to sneak out and then we could ride around. She lived in Blue Mound, Texas, a small former farming town north of Fort Worth, Texas. She lived in the first modern housing project in that area. This was about 1979 or 80. Her name was Lisa. I drove an old 1969 Chevy pickup, but I never had much money back then. I drove from Hearst to her house on fumes, knowing there was a gas station close to her house so I could fuel up again. Well, I went to her window, but she got mad at me for doing that so late at night, so I finally left. That old beater of a truck didn't make it a block before it ran out of gas. I was just out of the housing development, about 150 feet or so, and I couldn't go back to her house and ask for help, so I started the long 1-mile march to the gas station at the other end of the road. Remember, this used to be an old farming community, so outside of the housing development, it was still cattle and wheat fields. I was walking down this old pea gravel road. On my left was a fence with a large acreage over there. On my right was a pasture of about 10 acres or so, barbed wire fence with small oak trees lining the fence line. While I was walking down the road, I heard footsteps, so I naturally thought it was a cow or a calf. I stopped and made moo sounds, but no return. Now, most cows, and especially calves, will answer back, so I found that unusual, but just kept walking. So I was listening to the cadence. It wasn't a 4-leg animal. That was 2 legs. All 4-legged animals have a step, step, pause, step, step, or clip-clop kind of cadence. This was step, 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 keeping time with my steps. If I stopped, it stopped. I did this several times. I even yelled back that if someone was there to make themselves known, but nothing. So I kept walking, but I stopped suddenly, and the step went one more than my steps, but it stopped abruptly. I did that twice. Now I was getting spooked. The second time I stopped, I pretended to start walking, and whatever it was, took 2 steps and then stopped. I heard a groan. Then I began walking again. A few seconds later, I didn't hear it in the field behind the trees anymore, but something was behind me, but the step sounded like a wet, flappy, but very large duck feet, for lack of a better word. It was a loud, large, flappy flesh sound on the pea gravel road. I turned around and began screaming at whatever it was. I took my cigarette lighter from my pocket and lit it, walking towards the sound. But it was blinding me in the darkness. So I relit it with my hand behind the flame to block my eyes from the flame and the light. I do not recall seeing anything, but I do remember that I couldn't see the housing development anymore. After that, I turned around and started walking again, much faster. The trees ended about 50 feet from the end of the fence line, and at that point I heard no more footsteps beside my own. I called my mom, and she came out, and we got gas in my truck, and I drove home. My truck was at the intersection of Maiden Lane and Cantrell Sansom Road. In 1980, that was still basically rural. The field I had to walk past is still there. I never saw it, only heard it. I knew nothing about Bigfoot or Sasquatch at that time of my life. But when I started listening to the Bigfoot stories on YouTube, those memories came back. I had some of the same experiences as many others did. I never go to the woods anymore. If I do, it's never at night. Signed, Stephen E. I am submitting this account of what I saw. I am familiar with black bear, elk, and deer. I spend multiple weeks each year in the field for my work and for hiking. What I describe below does not match any known animal I have previously seen. I am 42 years old and work as a civil engineer. This happened on the western slopes of the Cascades in Washington. The date was August 11, 2023, and it occurred just after 5:30 a.m. I had planned to report this to the BFRO, but no investigator called me back. Here are the specifics as I wrote them down, intending to file a report. The location and conditions. The incident occurred on a decommissioned Forest Service spur road off NF 23. Elevation is approximately 3,100 feet. The road is gated to vehicles, but open to foot traffic. It runs along a small creek on the east side and a mixed fir and cedar slope on the west. Weather was clear, no wind. Temperature in the high 40s Fahrenheit. There had been a light rain 2 days earlier, so the ground and the roadside dust were slightly damp, but not muddy. I was alone, hiking in to check a potential backcountry campsite I had marked earlier that summer. Sunrise for that day was 6:04 a.m. I left my vehicle at 4:45 a.m. and walked past the gate with a headlamp. By the time of the sighting, the headlamp was off. There was enough light to see the road clearly. At approximately 5:30 a.m., I was roughly 1.7 miles past the gate. The road curves gently to the right and then rises. The creek drops away to my left. On my right, the cut bank rises about 12 to 15 feet, then transitions to forest. As I came up on that curve, I heard a series of 3 knocks from up ahead, off to the right side of the road. They sounded like solid wood striking wood. Spacing was even, about 1 second between impacts. They were not echoes of my own footsteps or of rockfall. The sound was sharp and localized. I stopped and listened. No more knocks. I did hear what I initially took to be a single heavy footfall or maybe a small rock sliding down the cut bank, but then silence again. I continued walking, slower, watching the road surface and the brush line. Roughly 50 to 60 yards ahead, the road straightens for maybe another 60 to 70 yards. At the far end of that straight section, I saw movement before I could identify detail. There was something dark crossing the road from left to right, from the creek side toward the uphill slope. Initially, I assumed bear. The figure was large and dark against the lighter road surface. However, instead of dropping to all fours or moving in a bear's side-to-side gait, it maintained a vertical posture the entire time that it was in view. At this first sighting, the distance was about 120 to 130 yards. It completed the crossing in roughly 3 seconds, from when I first noticed motion to when it reached the right edge of the roadway and went up onto the cut bank. I stopped walking as soon as I realized it was on 2 legs. I stood there for 10 to 15 seconds, listening. No sounds beside the creek and the normal forest noise. Then, from approximately the same area where it had gone up the bank, I saw it again. It came back down onto the road, this time moving right to left from my perspective, but angled slightly toward me, as if walking diagonally across the road rather than straight over it. Because I had walked a few more yards before I stopped, the distance was now closer. My best estimate is 80 to 90 yards. There was enough low light that remained in the sky that its outline and some detail were visible. It was clearly bipedal. It did not bob like a person jogging. The head and the shoulders moved relatively level as it walked. Stride length appeared significantly longer than a human. I counted 4 visible steps from when both feet were clearly in view until it reached the far edge of the road. On the 3rd step, it turned its upper body and head toward me. We were facing each other down the road, though still at a distance. It paused mid-step for approximately 2 seconds, long enough for me to focus and register specific features, before completing the step and continuing off the side of the road down toward the creek. As for the description, the height. Using the road width, which is a standard 12-foot lane, and comparing its height against a small alder I later measured, I estimate the creature to be 7.5 to 8 feet tall. This is an estimate, but I am confident it was significantly taller than any person. Build. Very broad through the shoulders and chest. Torso thick front to back. Arms were long in proportion to the body. The hands hung approximately mid-thigh when the arms were relaxed. Posture. Upright, but with a slight forward lean at the hips. Head set low into the shoulders with little visible neck from the front. The gait. The stride was long and smooth. Knees and hips flexed more than a human's normal walk. There was no swinging of elbows like a person pumping their arms. Instead, the arms hung with a moderate natural swing. The hair. Covered head to foot in dark hair, uniform in color. A very dark brown or possibly near black. In the available light, I could not see individual strands, but the outline was not perfectly smooth. The edges suggested 2 to 3 inches of hair length on the arms and legs, slightly longer on the torso. No visible bare skin on the arms or the legs. The head and face. The head appeared slightly domed, but not what I would call conical. The brow was strongly pronounced, casting shadow over the eye area. The face was flatter than a human's, with a wide, straight nose. The jaw appeared very broad. I could not make out the mouth clearly, but I am certain there was no extended muzzle, and there were no visible ears on the head. The eyes. At that distance and light level, I could not see color or complete shape, but I did see the placement, slightly wider than a human's would be set, and it was deep under the brow ridge. Hands and feet. No detail on fingers or toes at that distance, only that the hands were large, and the feet proportionately large compared to the legs. There was no sign of clothing or footwear. For the colors and markings, as mentioned, solid dark, no stripes, patches, or variations, no pack, hat, reflective gear, or anything indicative of human clothing. The sound and the smell. During the sighting itself, I did not hear vocalizations. When it stepped off the road down toward the creek, I heard 2 heavy impacts on the slope and the sound of loose rock or soil sliding. I detected no strong odor. The creature's behavior did not appear panicked. It crossed the road twice at a calm, steady pace. The 2-second pause when it turned its torso and head toward me suggested it had noticed me, and it was assessing the situation. There was no bluff charge or display of threat. After that brief pause, it completed its step, continued down off the road, and disappeared from view. I did not see branches moving or hear further noise beyond those 2 footfalls on the slope. My impression was that it chose not to retreat deeper into the woods on the uphill right side, but instead crossed down toward the creek, using the terrain and distance as its safety. After the sighting, I stood in position for another 20 to 30 seconds, listening. When no further sound came, I backed up along the road approximately 20 yards, then turned and walked at a faster pace back toward the gate. I did not run, mostly because the road surface was uneven and I did not want to fall. At the vehicle, I sat and wrote down the time, weather conditions, and as many details as I could remember, as well as made a rough sketch of the location and the movements before leaving. I did not return that day to the exact crossing spot. I went back the next morning with a coworker around 9 a.m. with better light. At the area of the second crossing on the left road edge, we found several impressions in the damp dirt and the moss beyond the gravel. 2 of them were elongated and roughly foot-shaped, about 14 to 15 inches long and 6 to 6.5 inches across at the widest points. The ground there is uneven and rocky. The impressions were not clear enough to show details of the toes. We did not attempt casting. The terrain would have been unforgiving, and we were not expecting to find any clear prints, and neither of us brought materials with us. We measured the distance between the centers of 2 consecutive impressions at approximately 52 to 54 inches along the direction of travel. This is significantly longer than my own walking stride. I am 6 foot 1 inches tall. My normal stride is 32 to 34 inches. We followed the line of impressions downhill for perhaps 20 feet before they disappeared into Rocky Creek edge, where there was bedrock and exposed stones. We saw no sign of bear tracks or scat in that immediate area. There were deer tracks along the creek, but not crossing at that point. Other considerations that I observed that I wish to include. There are no houses, cabins, or legal campsites within more than a mile of that location. I saw no vehicles parked at either pullouts near the gate. I encountered no other hikers that morning. I have considered the possibility of a person hoaxing, but if a person was present and wanted to scare or trick me or anyone, they would have to 1. Be over 7 feet tall, or they need to be on stilts and walk on unstable, rocky slope terrain. 2. Move with a long, fluid stride in low light on said loose rock. Wear a uniform, dark, full-body suit, or some other variation with no visible seams or color breaks. And then remain completely silent beside the natural footfall sounds. Given the terrain and the lack of any sign of other people, I find this scenario highly unlikely. I am aware of what the word Bigfoot implies socially. I do not submit this seeking attention. I am submitting this because I do believe I observed an unclassified bipedal primate, and I think it's important to document the details accurately while they were still fresh. Signed, William. All right, my Sasquatch, there you go. 2 reports to wind up the year. I do hope everyone has a wonderful New Year's wherever you are in the world, and we will be getting together again real soon in 2026. Until then, please always remember that you can listen to our podcast at any time you want. Just tell Alexa, "Hey Alexa, play the latest from Buckeye Bigfoot." Or you can find us over on Spreaker. Anyway, my folks, please always remember, absence of proof is not proof of absence. Thanks for listening.